"Are you Nathan?" she asked, voice shaking. She looked past me into the house, where Lisa had appeared in the hallway, face going pale. She opened the folder. The first photo slid out and hit the porch light. My wife, a man I'd never seen, a restaurant I recognized, his hand on her thigh under the table. The timestamp read March 14th, 7:43 p.m., the same night Lisa told me she was working late. Then Claire said, "I have 847 text messages, hotel receipts, GPS logs from his car, Venmo transactions, and a timeline that matches every single night your wife said she was out with the girls." She thrust the folder into my hands. "I spent 6 weeks building this case, and now I'm giving it to you, because we deserve better than this." It was 9:47 p.m. on an ordinary Tuesday evening when Nathan Cross's carefully constructed world began to unravel. He was in the kitchen loading the dishwasher, the hum of appliances mixing with the background noise of a reality show his wife Lisa was half watching from the couch, when 3 sharp knocks cut through the comfortable routine like a blade. He opened the front door to find a woman he had never seen before. Mid-30s, blonde hair pulled tight, eyes raw and swollen from what looked like days of crying. She was holding a manila folder so thick it resembled a phone book, gripped in her hands like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She asked if he was Nathan, her voice barely holding steady. He confirmed it, and before he could ask who she was, she looked past him into the house where Lisa had appeared in the hallway, drawn by the sound of the unfamiliar voice. The moment the 2 women's eyes met, the air in the room shifted. The stranger, Claire, introduced herself not with warmth, but with cold, broken certainty. She was Claire Keller, and she was there because her husband had been having an affair with Lisa for 8 months. Before anyone could respond, before Lisa could speak or Nathan could fully process what he was hearing, Claire opened the folder and let the first photograph slide free. It landed in the porch light like a confession. Lisa and a man Nathan had never seen, sitting at a restaurant he recognized, the man's hand resting on Lisa's thigh beneath the table. The timestamp printed on the photo read March 14th, 7:43 p.m., the same evening Lisa had told Nathan she was working late. Claire's voice cracked as she identified the man as her husband, David, and then she held up the folder like evidence at trial, describing its contents in clinical, devastating detail. 847 text messages, hotel receipts, GPS logs pulled from David's car, Venmo transactions, and a timeline that corresponded exactly with every night Lisa had claimed to be out with friends or staying late at the office. Behind Nathan, Lisa made a sound like she had been physically struck. Claire did not look at her with hatred. She looked at Nathan with the exhausted eyes of someone who had already passed through the worst of it and had come out the other side with nothing left to lose but the truth. She had spent 6 weeks building the case, she explained, hiring a private investigator at a cost of $8,000 because she knew from experience that David would deny everything without irrefutable proof. She had confronted him 2 days before this knock on Nathan's door. He had tried to deny it, then tried to minimize it, and she had thrown him out and filed for divorce the very next day. Now she was standing on a stranger's porch on a Tuesday night because she believed, with quiet and absolute conviction, that Nathan deserved to know what she knew. She thrust the folder into his hands, looked past him one final time at Lisa's pale and trembling face, and said the words that would echo in Nathan's mind for months to come. "We deserve better than this." In that single moment, standing in his own doorway holding a stranger's evidence of his wife's betrayal, Nathan Cross's life split cleanly into before and after. Before the knock on the door, before Claire Keller stepped into his life with her folder full of proof, Nathan Cross had been living the kind of existence that most people would describe as stable, and some would call enviable. He was 39 years old, a systems engineer for a downtown Austin tech company, a man who prided himself on his predictability and found genuine comfort in routine. 6:30 wake-up, coffee, emails, a 9 o'clock stand-up meeting, lunch at his desk, dinner with his wife, television, bed by 11. He had been doing the same thing for 7 years, and he liked it that way. Boring, maybe, but boring felt safe, and safety was something Nathan had quietly built his entire adult life around. His wife Lisa was a marketing director for a healthcare startup, ambitious and driven in all the ways Nathan was measured and steady. She answered emails at midnight, took calls during dinner, and wore her career like armor. They had been married for 6 years, together for 9, and the subject of children had been drifting between them like an unresolved conversation for the better part of 2 years. "Not yet," Lisa would say. "Let me get this promotion first, then we'll start trying." Nathan believed her. He believed most things she told him because trust, to his mind, was not something you had to constantly justify. It was the foundation you built everything else on top of. The name David Keller entered Nathan's life 8 months before Claire's knock, introduced so casually that it barely registered at the time. Lisa mentioned him one evening while they were making dinner together, her tone light and offhand, the way you might mention a new coworker you found mildly interesting. "There's a new guy at work," she said. "David. He's heading up the rebrand project." Nathan nodded, half listening, the way a person does when nothing sounds like a warning. But the mentions continued, small and consistent, woven into the daily fabric of conversation with increasing frequency. David suggested a new approach to the Q3 campaign. "David and I grabbed lunch to go over the deck. David thinks we should pivot our messaging." Nathan noticed the pattern but said nothing because he was not, in his own self-assessment, the jealous type. He was not the kind of husband who monitored his wife's professional relationships or grew territorial over every name she dropped. He trusted her, and at the time that trust still felt like a virtue rather than a vulnerability. The late nights began in February. Texts arrived in the early evening. "Working late, don't wait up. Team dinner, I'll be home by 10. And then 10 became 11, and 11 became midnight, and midnight sometimes became 1 in the morning. When Lisa came home on those nights, she smelled like wine and a cologne that wasn't Nathan's, and when he asked how her evening had gone, she would give him nothing but exhaustion and distance. 2 words and a closed bedroom door. He told himself it was work stress, that she was grinding for the promotion she always talked about, that the distance was temporary and circumstantial. But somewhere beneath the reasonable explanations, in a place he refused to examine too closely, something was already beginning to come apart. Nathan Cross was not a man who acted on feeling alone. He was an engineer by training and temperament, someone who lived in the world of systems and patterns and verifiable outcomes. And when the quiet alarm in the back of his mind refused to go quiet, he did what came most naturally to him. He started paying attention, methodically and without drama. He noticed the way Lisa now took her phone into the bathroom every evening, the way she angled the screen away from him when they sat together on the couch, the way she had begun dressing differently for work without explanation. Tighter clothes, more makeup, a perfume he had never smelled before and had never been asked to buy. "You look nice," he would say. "Thanks," she would answer. "Big presentation today." But the presentations were happening 3 times a week now, and something about the frequency felt wrong in the way that a repeated error in code eventually reveals a flaw in the underlying logic. In March, he asked her directly whether everything was okay between them, and she looked up from her phone with the mild surprise of someone who had not expected the question. She told him she was busy, not distant, and that there was a difference, and she asked him not to do this right now because she was exhausted. Then she went back to her phone, and he went back to pretending he believed her. The girls' nights started in April, a new pattern layered on top of the old one. Lisa would leave at 7 in the evening and return at 1 in the morning, makeup smudged and hair loose and the smell of alcohol on her breath. And the next morning she would describe pleasant evenings with friends in cheerful, vague terms that contained no real detail. The crack appeared at a backyard barbecue 2 weeks into the routine, when Nathan casually mentioned one of these outings to Sarah, one of the friends Lisa had named. Sarah's face went briefly, unmistakably blank before she recovered and changed the subject with a speed that told Nathan everything he needed to know. He did not confront Lisa. Instead, he built a spreadsheet. Column A was the date. Column B was Lisa's stated reason for being out. Column C was the time she left. Column D was the time she returned.
Column E was his observations: smell, behavior, phone activity. He tracked it for 6 weeks, and the pattern that emerged was impossible to dismiss. Every late work night fell on a Tuesday or Thursday, every girls' night on a Friday, and every time she came home after midnight, she went straight to the shower regardless of how tired she claimed to be. The data was clear, but data was not proof, and Nathan knew the difference. So he made a decision he would later describe with uncomfortable honesty. He installed a location tracking application on Lisa's phone one Sunday morning while she was in the shower, a process that took 90 seconds and required no password because she had never bothered to change the one he already knew. The app tracked GPS location only, nothing else, and the first significant ping came that Tuesday when Lisa's location placed her not at a nearby restaurant during her lunch break, but at the Fairmont Hotel in downtown Austin, where she remained for 2 hours before returning to the office as though nothing had happened at all.
The data that began accumulating on Nathan's phone over the following 3 weeks was not ambiguous. It was precise, repetitive, and devastating in its consistency. Tuesday, the Fairmount Hotel, noon to 2 in the afternoon. Thursday, the Fairmount again, the same window of time, the same pattern. Friday evenings, a bar on Rainey Street from 8 o'clock until well past midnight, with social media posts from Sarah and Jen confirming they were in entirely different parts of the city on the nights Lisa claimed to be out with them. Every location Lisa's phone reported contradicted every explanation she had offered. Working late meant a hotel. Girls' night meant a bar, but not with the friends she had named. The lies were not careless or improvised. They were structured, repeated, and maintained with a level of consistency that suggested genuine effort and planning. Lisa was not stumbling through a casual deception. She was managing a parallel life, and she was doing it well enough that it had gone undetected for months. Nathan did not sleep much during those weeks. He would lie in bed beside her in the dark, listening to her breathe with the steady ease of someone who felt no guilt, and he would turn the same questions over and over in his mind. Who was she texting in the bathroom at 11 o'clock? Was she choosing her clothes each morning for him or for someone else? When she kissed him goodbye and drove to work, would she be in a hotel room with another man by noon? The worst part, he would later say, was not the betrayal itself, it was the performance. She would come home from those evenings and ask about his day with genuine-seeming warmth, sit beside him on the couch, laugh at something on television, behave in every observable way like a woman who was fully present in her marriage and her home. The distance he had felt in the early months had given way to something more disturbing, a seamless, convincing normalcy that required her to look him in the eyes every evening and choose to continue lying. He thought about confronting her constantly, rehearsed the conversation in his head 100 different times, but each time he approached the edge of it, he pulled back for the same reason. Without hard, irrefutable evidence, she would deny it. He had watched it happen to other men, friends, co-workers, had watched their wives and partners turn accusations back on them with such practiced ease that the accuser ended up looking unstable and paranoid. He knew how the script went. The cheater always had a story, always had an explanation, always had a way of making the person who asked the right questions feel like the person doing something wrong. So Nathan waited, and he documented, and he said nothing. And every evening he kissed his wife and asked how her day was and sat across the dinner table from a woman he no longer recognized while the spreadsheet on his laptop grew longer, and the GPS logs on his phone told him, with quiet precision, exactly where she had been and exactly who she had been lying to protect. When Claire Keller stepped into Nathan's living room without waiting to be invited, she moved with the careful, deliberate energy of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times and had decided finally that rehearsal was over. She had built her case the way a prosecutor builds a case, not with anger but with method, with documentation, with the cold patience of someone who understood that emotion alone would not be enough. She had hired a private investigator 6 weeks earlier, she explained, because she had known for months that something was wrong and had known with equal certainty that David, confronted without evidence, would deny everything convincingly. The investigator had cost her $8,000. She considered it money well spent. She opened the folder on Nathan's coffee table and the photographs came out first, Lisa and David at a restaurant Nathan recognized, David's hand on Lisa's thigh, the timestamp reading March 14th, 7:43 p.m. Then another photo from a different night at the same restaurant, the two of them kissing. Then more, dozens of them, arranged in chronological order, timestamps and locations printed cleanly in the corners. 8 months of evidence spread across the glass surface of the coffee table like a case file. Claire narrated each stack as she placed it down. Text messages, 847 of them, printed in full, organized by date. Nathan picked up the top page and read the first exchange. Lisa writing that she couldn't stop thinking about him. David responding in kind, the two of them negotiating a Thursday meeting at their usual place. Lisa confirming she would tell Nathan she was working late. His hands began to shake. Hotel receipts followed. The Fairmont primarily, but also the W and a boutique hotel on South Congress. Then Venmo records showing split payments for dinners and drinks, small transactions that had been careful enough to look innocent individually, but that formed an unmistakable pattern when laid out together. Then GPS logs from David's car, 6 weeks of location data cross-referenced against the work events and client meetings he had described to Claire, every one of them matching a location where the photographs had been taken. Claire had not simply discovered an affair, she had documented it with the thoroughness of someone who had anticipated every possible denial and had removed, one by one, every exit route. She had confronted David 2 days before appearing on Nathan's doorstep, had shown him everything, and had watched him move through denial and minimization before settling on the explanation that it hadn't meant anything, that it was just physical, that he loved Claire and not Lisa. She had told him to leave, filed for divorce the following morning, and then had done something that Nathan, even in the fog of what he was hearing, recognized as an act of extraordinary generosity. She had driven to his house, at night, alone, and given him the truth she had paid $8,000 to obtain. Then she delivered the piece of information that stopped the room entirely. She was pregnant, 4 months along, and had been at home planning a nursery while her husband was meeting Lisa in hotel rooms twice a week. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Nathan had ever heard. After Claire left, the door closing behind her with a quiet finality that felt nothing like the violence of what had just occurred, Nathan stood in his own living room holding a stranger's folder and staring at his wife. Lisa was still in the hallway where she had retreated during Claire's recitation of evidence, her mascara tracking dark lines down her face, her hands shaking visibly at her sides. She said his name. She asked him to let her explain. He asked what exactly there was to explain. The 847 text messages, the hotel receipts, the 8 months of lying to his face, and when she said it wasn't like that, he asked, with a steadiness that surprised even him, what it was like then. Because from where he was standing, it looked like she had been living a double life while he sat in this house believing every word she said. She told him she hadn't meant for it to happen. He told her it had happened, repeatedly, over 8 months, which suggested it was not an accident but a choice she made again and again. She reached for him, and he stepped back. He sat down at the coffee table and began going through the folder page by page, and every page was worse than the one before it. Text messages where she called David by a name she had never called Nathan, photographs of them holding hands in public, a receipt from a jewelry store in March. David had bought her a bracelet for $800. Nathan asked her where it was. She said she had returned it the previous week because she had been planning to end the affair. He asked her when she had planned to tell him any of this, and she had no answer that made sense of 8 months of sustained, deliberate deception. He did not raise his voice. He did not break anything. He felt, more than anything, a profound and clarifying exhaustion, as though he had been carrying a weight he hadn't known was there and had finally been allowed to set it down. He told her she had 2 emotions available to her, sorry she had done it or sorry she had been caught, and when she didn't answer, her silence confirmed what he had already begun to understand. He picked up his keys, took the folder, and left. He checked into a Holiday Inn off the interstate and sat on the edge of the bed and read every single text message, studied every photograph, reviewed every receipt, and by 4 a.m. he had not slept and had no intention of sleeping, because the picture assembled by Claire's 6 weeks of documentation was not simply the picture of an affair. It was the picture of a woman who had been planning a future with another man. Messages in which Lisa told David she wished she could wake up next to him every morning.
messages in which David told her he was working on it, that it wouldn't be much longer. They had not been conducting a reckless, impulsive affair. They had been building towards something, and Nathan had been the obstacle they were patiently waiting to move around. He read it all, and by the time the sun came up, he had already decided what came next, and what came next was not a conversation or a counseling session or an attempt at reconciliation. It was a phone call to a divorce attorney named Richard Moss, scheduled for 8 o'clock that morning.
Richard Moss had the kind of office that communicated competence without trying too hard. Clean desk, no clutter, a bookshelf organized with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades knowing exactly where everything was. Nathan arrived at 10 o'clock that morning carrying the folder and approximately 3 hours of sleep, and Richard received both without comment. He read through Claire's documentation methodically, without reaction, turning pages with the focused calm of a man who had seen versions of this story many times before, but understood that treating it as routine would be a mistake. After 30 minutes, he set the folder down, looked across the desk at Nathan, and said that in his 22 years of family law practice, this was the most thoroughly documented affair he had ever seen. Nathan told him Claire had done all the work. Richard said that didn't matter. What mattered was that it was admissible, every piece of it, and that in the state of Texas, which recognized fault-based divorce, adultery was legal grounds, and this evidence was more than sufficient to establish it. He explained the landscape plainly and without softening. Nathan could pursue a contested divorce and request a disproportionate share of the marital assets, and Lisa would have a genuinely difficult time mounting a defense against documentation this comprehensive. Nathan asked about alimony. Knowing Lisa earned roughly 20% more than he did, Richard told him that in a fault-based case with this level of evidence, not only was Lisa unlikely to receive alimony, but Nathan could reasonably request it. Nathan sat with that for a moment. 12 hours earlier, he had been a man whose wife had just been exposed by a stranger at his front door, and now he was sitting across from an attorney who was explaining that the law, in this instance, was prepared to stand squarely on his side. It was the first time since the knock on the door that he had felt anything resembling solid ground. Richard outlined the strategy with the efficiency of someone who had mapped this terrain before. File the petition, serve Lisa with papers, enter the discovery phase, proceed to mediation, and go to trial only if necessary. But his strong advice was to use the evidence as leverage before it ever reached a courtroom. Most people, he explained, did not want the specific details of an 8-month affair entered into public record. Most people, when faced with the genuine possibility of 847 text messages and a stack of hotel receipts becoming accessible to their employer, their family, and their community, would find the motivation to be reasonable. Richard suggested offering Lisa a clean settlement on Nathan's terms. He keeps the house, she takes her car and her retirement accounts, no alimony flows in either direction, no prolonged legal battle, no public exposure. And if she refused those terms, they would go to trial and make sure that every photograph, every receipt, and every text message became part of the permanent public record. Nathan thought about Lisa's career, her reputation, the professional identity she had spent a decade building, and then he thought about how thoroughly and deliberately she had dismantled his trust over the previous 8 months. "Let's start with the offer," he said, "but I want her to understand exactly what happens if she says no." Richard smiled the quiet smile of a man who had just been given everything he needed to work with. Nathan drove home that afternoon with the divorce petition folded inside his jacket and a feeling he could not quite name. Not satisfaction, not relief, not anger, but something closer to the strange calm that settles in after a long and exhausting storm has finally broken. Lisa was home when he arrived. The house looked like it had absorbed her grief while he was gone. Tissues on the couch, a coffee mug sitting cold and forgotten on the kitchen counter, blinds half drawn against the afternoon light. She was sitting at the kitchen table, and she stood when he walked in, his name already forming on her lips before he had closed the door behind him. She told him they needed to talk. He agreed. He set his bag down, reached into his jacket, and placed the divorce papers on the table between them.
Her face shifted through several expressions in the span of a second: recognition, disbelief, then a quiet, collapsing devastation that she made no effort to conceal. She asked if he was really filing. He told her he had already filed, that what she was holding were her copies. She took the papers with hands that were not steady and began to read them, and after a moment she looked up and told him they could fix this, that they could go to counseling or therapy or whatever he needed, that she would do anything. He told her he didn't want therapy, he wanted a divorce. She dropped the papers. He picked them up and set them back on the table and told her she had two options, and he laid them out with the same precision he would have used explaining a system architecture to a colleague. Option 1, she signs the papers, agrees to the terms as written. He keeps the house, she takes her car and her retirement accounts. No alimony, no contest, clean separation. Option 2, they go to trial, and every piece of documentation Claire had assembled, every text message, every photograph, every hotel receipt, every GPS log, becomes part of the public record. Her family would know, her colleagues would know, the company she had spent her career building a reputation inside would know. Everyone who knew her name would have access to every detail of what she had done and how long she had done it. She stared at him. "You wouldn't," she said, and the words came out less like a statement and more like a question she was afraid to have answered. He said nothing, because silence was more effective than anything he could have added. She asked him again in a smaller voice whether this was truly what he wanted. He told her what he wanted was to have had a wife who hadn't spent 8 months lying to his face, and since that was no longer a possibility, what he wanted now was to move forward. She cried. He did not reach for her. He did not soften the terms or offer her a gesture toward reconciliation, because he understood, in the way that data eventually compels understanding, that there was nothing left to reconcile. She signed the papers 3 days later, without negotiation, without additional conditions, without a fight. One signature and a quiet exit, exactly as Richard Moss had predicted. The divorce was finalized in 60 days, the fastest Nathan had ever heard of. The weeks that followed the finalization were quieter than Nathan had expected, and quieter in a different way than the silence of the marriage had been in its final months. That silence had been heavy with things unsaid and truths deliberately avoided. This silence was simply empty, clear and open in the way that a room feels larger after you've removed furniture you didn't realize was crowding the space. He moved through the practical business of separation with the same methodical focus he had brought to building his spreadsheet and reading through Claire's folder, transferring accounts, updating records, informing the people who needed to be informed. He told his parents first. His mother cried. His father said very little, which was how his father expressed everything that mattered. He told his closest friends, accepted their anger on his behalf with something between gratitude and discomfort, and then asked them, gently, to let him move forward rather than backward. He was not interested in spending the next year rehearsing his grievance. He was interested in what came next. It was during this period that he ran into Claire. He was walking past a coffee shop near his office on a Thursday afternoon when he saw her through the window, sitting alone at a corner table, her pregnancy now visibly advanced, a cup of tea in front of her and a book open on the table that she was not reading. He went in. She looked up when he approached and said his name with the mild surprise of someone who had not been expecting company but found they didn't mind it. He asked how she was. She said, tired and real, which he understood completely. She told him the divorce was nearly done, that David was behaving the way David behaved, which was to say, not well, but that she had stopped organizing her emotional life around his behavior and found the change liberating. He told her the same was roughly true for him. They stood together in the easy, unguarded way of two people who have survived the same specific disaster and no longer need to explain themselves to each other. He thanked her for knocking on his door. She said simply that he had deserved to know the truth and that she had deserved to give it, and that those two things had felt inseparable to her from the moment she had made the decision to come. Then she told him she was having a girl, and for the first time since he had met her on his doorstep in tears, she looked genuinely, unmistakably happy.
Not the happiness of someone who had gotten what they wanted, but the harder, more earned happiness of someone who had faced what was real and chosen to keep going. He congratulated her. She touched her belly with the unconscious tenderness of someone still getting used to the miracle of it. She told him to take care of himself and walked away. And Nathan stood in the doorway of the coffee shop watching her go and understood with a clarity that surprised him that what he was feeling was not sadness or residual anger or the dull ache of loss. It was something closer to gratitude, for Claire's courage, for the truth she had carried to his door, and for the quiet, unexpected dignity of being given the chance to begin again.
6 months after the divorce was finalized, Nathan sold the house. He had stayed in it longer than he should have. He knew that. Had walked its rooms in the evenings trying to remember what it had felt like before the knowledge, before the folder, before the Tuesday night knock that had divided his life into 2 distinct eras. But memory, he found, is a stubborn tenant, and the house was full of versions of Lisa he could no longer reconcile with the person she had turned out to be. So he sold it, cleared it out, and moved into a condo downtown. Smaller, quieter, entirely his own in a way the house had never quite managed to be. He bought new furniture, none of it chosen in negotiation with anyone else's preferences. He hung things on the walls that he actually liked. He bought a coffee maker he had always wanted and used it every morning. These were small things, but small things, he was learning, were how a life got rebuilt. He started running again, something he had let slip away during the years of comfortable routine. He rejoined a gym. He called friends he had gradually lost touch with over the course of the marriage, men and women who received his reappearance with the generous warmth of people who had been waiting without saying so. Slowly, in the way that recovery from anything substantial tends to happen, not in a single turning point but in accumulated ordinary moments, he began to feel like himself again. The bad days did not disappear. There were still mornings when he replayed the last 8 months looking for the signs he should have caught sooner. Still evenings when the anger returned with enough force to feel fresh. Still occasional moments of the specific, grinding sadness that comes from having trusted someone completely and been wrong. But the bad days grew fewer, and the space between them grew wider, and he paid attention to that widening the way you pay attention to a wound that is genuinely healing. On a Friday evening, 3 months after moving into the condo, he was at a bar with coworkers when a woman sat down beside him. Red hair, easy smile, the kind of presence that fills a space without demanding it. She asked if the seat was taken. He said it was hers. Her name was Bemma. She was a graphic designer, quick and funny, the kind of person who listened the way most people only pretend to. They talked for 2 hours about nothing in particular and everything that mattered, and at the end of the evening she gave him her number and told him to call sometime. He did. He would later say that the story of Nathan Cross did not end with betrayal, or with the knock on the door, or with a signed divorce petition, or even with a chance encounter in a coffee shop with a pregnant woman who had given him the greatest unwilling gift of his life. It ended, or rather it continued, with a choice. To face the truth when it arrived, to refuse to look away from what the data was plainly showing, to walk away from someone who had decided he was not worth honesty, and to understand, finally, and without bitterness, that trust given to the wrong person is not a flaw in your character. It is simply the cost of being someone who still believes in something. And that belief, Nathan decided, was worth keeping.